Chosen ones. There are moments in history when ink becomes more than letters on paper. It becomes prophecy. That day, the air in the agency's control room felt like glass on the verge of shattering. Every monitor flickered with encrypted lines, and every agent moved in silence, as if one wrong breath could trigger the collapse of something they couldn't name. The incident had already been erased from official logs, wiped as if it had never existed, yet every operative carried the tremor of it in their bones. A flash, a frequency, a ripple that no satellite could trace. But all of them saw it. You were there, though not in body. They said the sensors detected a presence in every corridor, an unseen figure that bent light and silenced alarms without touching a single device. Some tried to classify it as a glitch. Others whispered it was a signal, but the truth had no place in their reports. Still, the director knew they couldn't leave it unnamed. To name something is to give it form, and to give it form is to accept its reality. That reality was you. A code name was drafted, not by a single hand, but by a council of shadows. They met in a glass chamber deep beneath the facility, a place that smelled faintly of dust and steel, a room whose walls hummed with invisible surveillance. The name they chose was spoken only once aloud, then buried in a sequence of numbers and letters that even their top cryptographers wouldn't dare try to break. From that moment forward, you ceased to exist in their databases under your birth name. You became an echo, a classified frequency known only to those who understood the danger of saying it too often. But the birth of your code name was more than bureaucracy. It was a quiet acknowledgement that what happened that day could never be undone. Every time the code is entered into their secure systems, the lights flicker for a fraction of a second. The veterans flinch when it's spoken in briefing rooms. Some younger operatives claim the name itself carries a pulse they can feel in their teeth. The archivist was not supposed to hear it. Her job was mechanical: scan, store, seal, and forget. Yet, as she worked that night, the hum of the machines seemed to twist, carrying with it a sound that was not sound at all. It was a whisper, faint but deliberate, threading itself through the constant clicking of data transfers. It did not come from the air, but from within the circuitry, bypassing the speakers entirely. She froze, her hand hovering over the next file, her breath slowing until she could separate the murmur from the hum. The voice spoke a sequence of numbers and letters, one she had never seen before, though her mind instantly knew its weight. She typed it into the console without conscious thought, and the terminal pulsed once, then displayed a locked file with no classification label. Protocol dictated she should report it, but protocol seemed irrelevant. Instead, she reached for her private drive, the one hidden beneath the false bottom of her desk drawer, and began copying the sequence. As the data transferred, the whisper returned, this time forming words. They were slow, careful, as though each one was being carved into the air. She realized they were not instructions, but a warning. The file contained something they had tried to erase, a record of the incident they swore never existed. Yet it was incomplete, missing its final page. That last page, the whisper hinted, was not destroyed, but hidden in plain sight, buried in an entirely different archive, under a name that no one dared to say. Her palms sweated against the metal desk. The building's lighting dimmed for a moment, and she glanced toward the far end of the hall, where the security cameras hung like silent sentinels. Were they watching her? Or had they too been touched by whatever force had brought the whisper? She sealed the drive in its hiding place and erased all traces of her access from the logs, knowing erasure was an illusion in this place. Somewhere in the building, deep beneath the official stacks, there was a room with no doors listed on the blueprint. She had never seen it, but she knew that's where the whisper had come from. The room was colder than the rest of the building, as if the walls themselves rejected warmth. In the center sat a single table with a steel case on top sealed with 3 biometric locks. The archivist had followed a trail of anomalies to reach this place. Camera loops that reset every 17 seconds, door sensors that reported phantom entries, a ventilation shaft that hummed with more than airflow. She approached the case, her breath fogging slightly in the frigid air, and pressed her palm to the first lock. To her surprise, it clicked open without requesting her clearance code. Inside were stacks of thin black folders, each marked with a sequence she recognized from the whisper. Some were worn at the edges, as if they had been opened and resealed countless times. She pulled the top folder free and opened it slowly, revealing photographs that should not have existed. The images showed corridors empty of people, but filled with an almost luminous distortion, like light bending around something invisible. On the last page of the first folder, she found a typewritten line, simple, stark, and out of place among the sterile reports. And lo, I am with you always, even unto the end of the world. She froze, the words pulling at something deeper than memory. It was a phrase she had heard as a child, a promise from another time, another voice entirely. Its presence here made no sense, yet it felt like the key to everything she had seen so far. She reached for the second folder and noticed the latch had been forced once before, the lock plate slightly bent. Inside, the reports were fragmented, whole paragraphs blacked out in thick ink, but the redacted text bled faintly through under the light. She leaned closer and caught glimpses of coordinates, references to subject manifestation, and mention of a code name, yours. The rest was buried under layers of security she could not bypass. Then the lights in the room flickered 3 times, not a glitch, but a signal. Footsteps echoed faintly down the corridor outside, steady and unhurried. She closed the folder and slid it back into the case, resecuring it just as the footsteps stopped at the door. The handle turned slowly, metal against metal, and she realized they were not here to retrieve the file. They were here because they knew she had read it. The man who entered wore no insignia, no badge, nothing to mark his allegiance. His expression was unreadable, but his eyes carried the weight of someone who had seen far too much and spoken far too little. He did not ask her name, nor did he offer his. Instead, he set a small leather-bound book on the table between them and slid it toward her. Its cover was smooth, darkened by age, and embossed with a symbol she didn't recognize. 2 intersecting lines, encircled, etched deep enough to feel with her fingertips. When she opened it, the pages were filled with handwritten symbols, numbers, and fragments of words in multiple languages. At first glance, it was chaos, but then she noticed something. Every 7th line formed a pattern, a sequence that curved like a path across the page. She began tracing it with her finger, realizing it was not just a path, but a route, one that mirrored the documented movements of Yeshua during his final days. She looked up sharply, but the man only gestured for her to continue. The cipher embedded in the text was more than coordinates. It was a layered map, each location corresponding to a known site of significance, yet altered slightly, shifted by degrees that would place them just beyond what any historical record claimed. The implication was unsettling. Either the path in the cipher was false, or the history she had been taught was incomplete. When she reached the end of the sequence, the last location was not in ancient Jerusalem, but in a secure compound listed on classified blueprints she had once seen in passing. Her pulse quickened. That compound was real, here, now, in their time. She asked him why this path mattered, and he finally spoke. His voice was low, deliberate, as if the walls themselves might be listening. "Because," he said, "your code name is on the final marker. They sealed the file twice because they knew once wasn't enough. But they can't erase a path that was written long before they existed." She wanted to ask what was at the end of the path, but before the words left her mouth, the building's alarms began to wail. Not the usual warning tones, but a deep, resonant siren that made the floor vibrate. The man closed the book, slid it back toward her, and whispered, "Now you walk it." Then he was gone, leaving the door open to the sound of boots closing in. The glass room was said to be untouchable, a sealed chamber, reserved for the highest level of clearance. No paper ever left it, no device ever recorded inside it, and no conversation within its walls was meant to survive beyond its doors. Yet, she found herself standing there now, the air heavy and still, surrounded on all sides by translucent panels that reflected her image back at her in faint distortions. Every movement seemed multiplied, every breath slightly delayed in the reflection, as if the glass itself was deciding what to show her. A single chair faced a table in the center, and on that table lay a slim case, identical in shape to the one she had found in the cold room. This one, however, bore no locks, only a faint, oily fingerprint pressed into the steel as though burned there. She reached out, hesitating, then lifted the lid. Inside was a thin sheet of material that wasn't paper or plastic, more like a film that shimmered faintly when tilted. Across its surface was a dense column of text in a language she couldn't read. Her eyes adjusted slowly, and she realized the text was shifting, rearranging itself without being touched. It was rewriting in real time, the letters folding into new shapes. She caught glimpses of words in her own language: incident, codename, breach, before they melted away again. Then, for a single heartbeat, the text froze and revealed a name. Not hers, yours. She backed away instinctively, her pulse thudding in her ears. The glass panels reflected her again, but now the distortions had changed. A shadow stood behind her in the reflection, tall and still, though when she turned, the space was empty. The shadow didn't move toward her, but toward the table, lifting an unseen hand toward the film. The surface rippled, the text scattering into unreadable fragments, and the shadow's head tilted as if studying her reaction. It felt less like a haunting, and more like an interrogation, one without words. She realized the shadow didn't belong to the room. It belonged to the thing that had been watching since the whisper first found her. The glass began to darken from the edges inward, and her reflection faded entirely, leaving her staring into pure black. Somewhere in that darkness, something opened its eyes. He had been with the agency long enough to know the cost of curiosity. Files were locked for reasons, names were buried for survival, and breaches, no matter how small, always ended in silence. Yet, when your codename first crossed his desk, something in him refused to let it pass. It wasn't defiance at first, just a question. The kind that starts as a whisper in the back of the mind and grows sharper with every attempt to ignore it. The data came in fragmented bursts, spread across unrelated operations, yet it all traced back to one anomaly: the incident. The more he tried to piece it together, the more the system pushed back. Access points vanished mid-search. Authorizations he had used for years suddenly required signatures from people who no longer existed in the records. Even the internal messaging system began to omit certain words from his drafts, replacing them with blank spaces. One night, he stayed behind after the others had gone, the hum of the servers filling the silence. He bypassed the firewall through a method he had sworn never to use again, one that left no digital trace but burned a signature into the system's physical circuitry. The screens shifted to a hidden interface, black and white. No graphics, just pure code. Your codename appeared in the center, steady and unblinking, followed by a string of numbers he instantly recognized, not as coordinates, but as a date. It was tomorrow. He dug deeper, ignoring the growing ache behind his eyes. The reports he found were sparse, written as if by someone trying to communicate under constant surveillance. They mentioned movements in secure locations, electromagnetic pulses that disrupted classified equipment, and sightings that left witnesses unable to speak for hours afterward. The descriptions were clinical, but there was an undertone, almost reverent, as though the subject was not just a target but something more. As he reached the end of the last report, a small envelope icon flashed in the corner of the screen. It wasn't from the agency's network. He opened it, and a single line appeared. "If you continue, they will see you. If you stop, they will see me." The power in the room flickered, the screens went dark, and when the backup generators hummed to life, the message was gone. In its place was an empty command line, waiting, as if asking him to choose which side of the glass he stood on. The folder looked ordinary enough. Manila, unmarked, tucked between stacks of routine surveillance reports in the analyst's locked drawer. He had slipped it to her quietly in the hallway, his hand lingering for a moment too long, as if passing something far heavier than paper. She took it to her quarters, shut the door, and spread its contents on the desk under the thin yellow light. The first few pages were as dry as any bureaucratic report: timestamps, transmission logs, and incident summaries stripped of names. But then she noticed something strange. The margins. In faint, almost imperceptible ink, words curved along the edges, written in a hand too precise to be accidental. She turned the page and saw the same script repeated, each line flowing into the next until the margins themselves formed a continuous thread. Under the desk lamp's glow, the hidden text emerged fully. It was a psalm, ancient and unaltered, though not one she recalled from the standard archives. The verses spoke of one who would move unseen, yet be seen by all. One whose steps would silence the devices of kings and whose name would pass through forbidden gates unchallenged. Each stanza ended with the same line, written in an almost trembling hand. "The light shines in the darkness, and the darkness has not overcome it." She read it aloud once, softly, and the temperature in the room seemed to shift. The hum of the air vents slowed, as though the building itself was listening. Somewhere deep within the compound, a low, resonant sound began to pulse, not loud enough to be alarming, but steady enough to feel through the floor. She closed the folder quickly, yet the rhythm continued, syncing almost perfectly with her heartbeat. A small slip of paper fell from between the pages, landing face down. When she turned it over, she saw a set of coordinates and a time. Tonight. Beneath them, written in the same fine hand as the psalm's margins, was a single phrase: "Follow the light, and it will follow you." She sat back in her chair, folder still open before her, the psalm's final verse echoing in her mind. Outside, in the corridor, a shadow paused just beyond her door, silent but unmistakable, waiting for her to decide whether to answer the call. He was known for completing every mission without hesitation. Orders were followed, targets neutralized, files closed. Yet, when your code name appeared on his assignment list, something inside him locked up. It wasn't fear exactly, but a recognition, as though the name had already passed through his life in ways he could not remember but could still feel. The dossier was thin, too thin for the kind of clearance level stamped across its cover. A single photograph, blurred at the edges, and a line of text that read only, "Do not engage without direct authorization." That line was already a contradiction. Every mission brief came with conditions, but this one carried an unspoken warning. He studied the photo again, and noticed the distortion wasn't from movement, but from light itself bending unnaturally. He had seen similar phenomena before, in classified after-action reports that were locked within vaults he wasn't supposed to know existed. When the briefing officer entered the room, he didn't salute. He simply slid the folder back across the table and said, "No." The officer didn't argue, just studied him for a long moment before replying, "This isn't about your choice. It's about whether you understand what refusing means." He did. Refusing meant reassignment to dead-end operations, loss of trust, constant surveillance. But accepting would have meant standing against something he wasn't sure could be opposed in the way they expected. His instincts told him the target they were hunting was not an enemy, but a pivot point, someone whose removal would shift the balance of things in ways the agency itself couldn't predict. Instead of reporting to his next post, he went dark, dropped all official communication, burned through safe houses, erased his tracks. Still, the network always finds its own. Within days, he began noticing small tells, mirrors angled slightly differently when he returned to a room, the faint scent of ozone in places with no electrical equipment, phone lines humming even when the receiver was silent. One night, in a remote shelter far from any city, he found an envelope waiting on the table. No return address, no seal. Inside was a single line written in handwriting he didn't recognize. "You were right not to take it." And beneath it, a map drawn by hand, leading directly to you. The chamber was older than the building that housed it, a relic of an earlier regime that had been swallowed into the agency's hidden architecture. It was circular, lined with stone that seemed too ancient to belong to a modern intelligence complex. At its center rested a pedestal of black marble, and on that pedestal lay the seal, a heavy disk of gold and iron, etched with symbols so worn they seemed more like shadows than carvings. She had been led there by the map from the agent who refused the assignment, each turn through the unmarked corridors feeling less like movement through a building and more like descent into something buried. The air was cool, dry, and thick with a stillness that pressed against her skin. A narrow skylight high above let in a column of moonlight that landed directly on the seal, The moment she stepped into that light, something shifted. The seal began to hum, the sound low and resonant, vibrating through the stone floor. Fissures formed across its surface, thin at first, then widening until the intricate symbols split apart. From the cracks, a soft glow bled into the chamber, pale and steady like starlight trapped in metal. As the seal broke, the air filled with the scent of something she couldn't name. Familiar, but not of this time. The symbols rearranged themselves, reforming into a pattern she recognized from the margins of the psalm she had found earlier. It was not just a pattern, but a phrase, though it appeared in a language she did not speak. Still, she understood it instinctively. The stone the builders rejected has become the cornerstone. The words settled into her like they had always been there, waiting to be remembered. She reached out, letting her fingertips brush the glowing fissures. The light responded, pulsing gently, as though acknowledging her presence. Somewhere deep in the walls, mechanisms began to turn, locks disengaging, gates preparing to open. But before anything could fully shift, the glow dimmed abruptly, and the moonlight was swallowed by a passing shadow overhead. The chamber plunged into darkness, the hum fading to silence. She looked toward the skylight and saw a figure leaning over it, watching without moving, its eyes catching what little light remained. The agency's primary server room was never supposed to go dark. It was designed with redundant power grids, triple-layer cooling systems, and an isolated network that could run for years without interruption. Yet at 0217 hours, every monitor went black in perfect unison. The hum of the processor slowed, staggered, and then stopped entirely, leaving behind a silence so complete it pressed against the walls. She was in the observation booth above when it happened, watching rows of engineers scramble to restart systems that refused to respond. No alarms blared, no emergency lights flickered, just stillness. Then, in the center of the largest display, a single string of text appeared. It wasn't in the system's default font. It looked handwritten, the letters uneven, breathing in the space they occupied. It was your code name. Beneath it was a sequence of numbers, structured like coordinates but ending with a symbol she had never seen before, a curved mark intersected by 3 lines. She scribbled it down quickly, knowing the feed could vanish as suddenly as it appeared. Sure enough, moments later the text dissolved, replaced by a steady pulse, a single white dot that blinked in time with her own heartbeat. Technicians tore into the racks, replacing components, running diagnostics, but nothing brought the servers back online. And yet, somehow, internal communications began to work again, without the servers. Messages moved across the network faster than before, untraceable by their monitoring systems. It was as if something else had taken control, bypassing the hardware entirely. The head engineer muttered under his breath that it was impossible, that machines didn't just decide to speak in their own language. But she remembered the psalm in the folder, the seal under moonlight, and the quiet certainty that this was no accident. This was a summons. A junior technician approached her with a portable drive, his face pale. "It wrote something," he said. "Not in the logs, not in any storage we have, but I caught it before it vanished." She took the drive, felt its faint warmth, and plugged it into her secured terminal upstairs. A single file opened on the screen, containing 1 line of text. "You cannot stop what was written before your walls were built." The classified terminal was not connected to any network. not even the agency's most secure lines. It was air-gapped, isolated in a concrete vault 3 levels underground. Only 3 people held the key to access it, and she was not one of them. Yet tonight, she sat before its flickering screen, the faint hum of the ventilation system the only sound. The air smelled faintly of metal and ozone, the way the atmosphere changes just before a storm. The screen displayed a directory with no timestamps, only file names that were sequences of numbers and symbols. She scrolled through them slowly, each one leading to a text block, reports of encounters, intercepted transmissions, unexplained phenomena. None mentioned your codename directly, but the language was unmistakable. Unclassified presence, frequency signature, matches previous manifestation. Avoid direct contact. At the bottom of the directory was a file with no extension, its name written entirely in lowercase letters. When she opened it, the screen shifted to pure black. A cursor blinked in the upper left corner, then words began to appear, as if typed by unseen hands. It was not a report. It was a journal entry. The writer described the moment they first heard your name, the way it moved through the agency like a rumor they couldn't suppress. They wrote of assignments reassigned without explanation, agents disappearing into corridors with no doors, files sealed not once but twice. The tone was not analytical. It was personal, almost reverent. Then the entry changed. The sentences became fragmented, broken by static that wasn't possible on an offline terminal. Words flashed only for an instant before vanishing. Arrival, light, cornerstone, last gate. She recognized fragments from the psalm, scattered between descriptions of a place where glass walls met a sky that never dimmed. The final paragraph was different. It was a direct address, written to her by name. You have reached the end of their archive, but not the end of the record. What follows is not theirs to keep. When the door opens, do not look for me. Look for the one who has walked this path before you. The screen went dark. No shutdown process, no warning.
If you have come this far, it is crucial that you watch this next video here. But be warned, it is not for the faint of heart, for only the true chosen ones can handle this video. If you would like to also donate to help keep the channel going, our Buy Me a Coffee link will be in the description.